Welcome back to Keep Your Agree Brew, and here's a very Merry Christmas to you from all of us here at Keep Your Agree Brew. Today we're looking at a very well-known Christmas passage, Isaiah chapter 9, verses 1 through 6 in the Masoretic text. In your English translation, it would be verses 2 through 7. And we're going to see what these verses have to tell us about the message of true hope and liberation that Christmas points us to. Starting with verse 1, Ha'am ha'holachim ba'choshech ra'u or gadol. Yosheveh be'eretz zalmavet or naga alehem. The people who were walking in darkness have seen a great light. The dwellers in the land of the shadow of death, a light has shone upon them. And so we're going to see that this language of light versus darkness characterizes the message of hope which Isaiah brings us. There's something associated with light, which is redemption, entrance into God's kingdom, and darkness, being trapped under oppression, and particularly the oppression of our own sin that leads to death. Moving on to verse 2. Hirbita hagoy, lo higdalta hasimcha, samachu lefanecha, ka simchat Katzir, Ka'asher Yagilu Chalakam Shalal. So one of the key things to notice in this passage is the use of the prophetic katal. So Hirbita, Higdalta, and Samachu are in the perfect tense aspect, or katal. But they're not primarily talking about something that happened in the past, but they're pointing forward to something that will happen in the future and talking about that as though it's already happened. So that's the gist of the prophetic katal. So we can basically translate these verbs in the future tense. And you will cause the nation to be many or to multiply. You will make great its joy. You will increase its joy. They will rejoice before you as or like the joy in the harvest, just as they rejoice when they divide the spoil. Verse 3. Ki et ol Subolo ve'et mate sichmo shevet hanoges bo ha-hitota kayom Midian. For the yoke of its burden and the staff of its shoulders, the rod of the oppressor against it, you have shattered as the day of Midian, or as in the day of Midian. Notice, first of all, the use of Exodus language and imagery, the yoke of his burden. So while this prophecy is talking about a future redemption, it also looks back at previous redemption. So what this is pointing to is really a second Exodus by which God is going to redeem his people. I also find the language of Shevet HaNogesh significant because we see another kind of rod in Psalm 2. Psalm 2 talks about the Lord's anointed having a rod of iron, Shevet Bartzel. So I suspect there's an echo of Psalm 2 here in this verse. And as the Lord shatters the rod of the oppressor, he's establishing his kingship over us, which liberates us from that which truly oppresses us, our sin. Moving on to verse 4. Ki chol so'on so'en bera'ash v'simla megolala v'damim v'hayata lishrifa ma'acholet esh. For every boot of the tramping soldier in quaking, and every garment rolled in blood. So this is a poal participle of galal. Every garment rolled in blood will be for burning, food for fire. What this is talking about is the establishment of peace. There is also a very real sense in which living in a fallen world means we're subject to real forms of oppression, real ways in which people sin against us, and ways in which we also contribute to that in causing literal and metaphorical bloodshed in this world. And the Lord is going to bring a wonderful peace that only he can establish. Verse 5. Ki yelet yulad lanu, bin nitan lanu, vatehi ha-misra al shichmo, va-yikra shamo, pele yoetz el gibor, aviad sar shalom. And this is what Christmas is about. For a child is born to us. A son is given to us. And the dominion or the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called, or his name will be called, Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal or Everlasting Father, Av for Father, Ad, ever, until, but in this case, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And the good news continues in verse 6. Lemarbe hamisra ule shalom in kitz al kise David ve'al mamlachto lechachin ota ule sa'ada b'mishpat u'vizedaka me'ata ve'ad olam kinat Adonai Zavaot ta'aseh zot. To the increase, or for the increase of the government or dominion, and for peace, there will be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it. So this is from the middle weak verb kun. To establish it and to support or uphold it in justice and in righteousness from now until forever. This word means zeal or jealousy. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this. So why is this such good news? When we look in the New Testament to see the fulfillment of this, we see that this has everything to do with redemption and the forgiveness of sins. The one who delivered us out of the authority or domain of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his beloved Son. This is talking about the work of God the Father in redeeming us, in calling us, delivering us out of darkness and transferring us to the kingdom of his Son. Note the language of kingdom versus this ersatz competing form of authority. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, holy nation, a people for God's possession, so that you may proclaim the excellencies of the one who out of darkness called you into his wonderful light. So why is Christmas such good news? Because it brings us the true hope and true liberation that comes from knowing that Jesus is King and submitting to him in faith. What Isaiah chapter 9 shows us is that we are fundamentally oppressed by ourselves. We need to be saved from ourselves and the oppression of our sin. And Jesus has come to bring us this true liberation that calls us out of darkness into his wonderful light. And we can be assured of this because of this prophecy that the zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this. And indeed, Jesus has already come. That's why we celebrate Christmas, when we celebrate Jesus' incarnation. But there is a day when he is coming again to make all things new. And so as we live in this already and not yet phase of redemptive history, although we sorrow at the suffering that we continue to experience, and we also grieve over our sin and the sin of others, we have hope because Jesus, the true King, is coming again to liberate us from this fallen world once and for all. That's all for today. Have a Merry Christmas, and we'll see you again next year.